She was born into one of the richest families in America, yet her childhood became a courtroom battlefield that shocked the nation. Before she could even understand her own name, Gloria Vanderbilt was at the center of a bitter custody war that turned her into a tabloid sensation. Surrounded by glamour, scandal, and unimaginable fortune, her life looked like a fairy tale from the outside. But behind the diamonds and high society whispers lay a story of loneliness, betrayal, and heartbreaking loss that would follow her for decades. Gloria Vanderbilt was born on February 20th, 1924, into a name that carried immense power in American society. As a member of the legendary Vanderbilt family of New York, she entered the world surrounded by privilege, prestige, and staggering wealth. The Vanderbilts had built their fortune through shipping and railroads in the 19th century, becoming one of America's most influential dynasties. By the time Gloria was born, however, much of that colossal fortune had been divided among heirs, and what remained was as much a burden of expectation as it was a blessing. Her father, Reginald Claypool Vanderbilt, was a charismatic but troubled man. Known in high society for his charm and recklessness, Reginald struggled with gambling and heavy drinking. His lifestyle reflected both the glamour and the decay that shadowed the later Vanderbilt generation. When Gloria was just over a year old, tragedy struck. Reginald died in 1925 at the age of 45 from complications related to a throat infection and internal hemorrhaging, conditions exacerbated by years of alcohol abuse. Though the infant Gloria could not comprehend the loss, its consequences shaped the trajectory of her entire life. Reginald's death left her the beneficiary of a $5 million trust fund, an extraordinary sum in the 1920s equivalent to tens of millions today. On paper, she was one of the wealthiest little girls in America. In reality, she was a child without a father, thrust into the center of adult conflicts over money, status, and control. Her mother, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, was young, glamorous, and frequently absent, preferring European travel and elite social circles to the responsibilities of motherhood. As a result, baby Gloria's early years were marked not by emotional security, but by instability. Nannies, caretakers, and shifting residences replaced the steady presence of parental love. Reginald's death did more than deprive Gloria of a father. It ignited tensions within the extended Vanderbilt clan. The immense trust fund set aside for her would soon become the focal point of one of the most sensational custody battles of the 20th century. What should have been a childhood of comfort and protection instead became the opening chapter of public scrutiny, legal warfare, and emotional upheaval. Thus, from the very beginning, Gloria Vanderbilt's life embodied a paradox: extraordinary wealth paired with profound vulnerability. Born into privilege, she nevertheless entered a world already marked by loss, a pattern of glamour shadowed by grief that would follow her for decades to come. By the time Gloria Vanderbilt was 10 years old, her life had already become a national spectacle. In 1934, during the bleak years of the Great Depression, she found herself at the center of one of the most sensational and widely covered custody trials in American history. What should have been a private family dispute instead unfolded under the glaring lights of the press, turning a vulnerable child into front-page news. The battle was between her mother, Gloria Morgan Vanderbilt, and her paternal aunt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, a respected sculptor, philanthropist, and founder of the Whitney Museum of American Art. On the surface, the case centered on who was better suited to raise young Gloria. Beneath that, however, lay another powerful issue: control of the child's substantial trust fund. The fortune left to Gloria by her late father made her not only a daughter to be protected, but an heiress whose guardianship carried immense financial authority. The courtroom drama quickly escalated into scandal. Gertrude accused Gloria Morgan of being an unfit mother, presenting testimony that painted her as neglectful, socially reckless, and morally questionable. Witnesses described lavish parties, romantic entanglements, and extended absences from her daughter's life. The press seized upon every lurid detail, sensationalizing the proceedings for a public hungry for distraction during hard economic times. Throughout the trial, reporters referred to the child as the poor little rich girl, a phrase that captured the public imagination. To many Americans struggling through poverty, Gloria's wealth seemed enviable. Yet the image of a lonely, scrutinized child caught between warring adults stirred sympathy. The nickname followed her for decades, reducing her complex experience to a headline that blended privilege with pity. In 1934, the judge ultimately ruled in favor of Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, awarding her custody. Gloria was removed from her mother's care and placed in her aunt's structured, disciplined household in New York. While Gertrude offered stability, culture, and education, the emotional toll on Gloria was profound. She later reflected on feeling like a possession fought over rather than a child loved unconditionally. The public nature of the trial left deep scars. Her childhood became inseparable from media intrusion and family betrayal. Trust, security, and privacy, essential elements of a healthy upbringing, were fractured under the weight of headlines and courtroom testimony. The custody battle did more than determine where Gloria would live. It shaped her lifelong sense of identity. From an early age, she learned that wealth did not shield one from pain, and that fame, even unwanted fame, could distort personal truth. The label, "poor little rich girl," lingered as both a symbol of her privilege and a reminder of the emotional cost that came with it. By 1941, Gloria Vanderbilt was restless, eager to escape the rigid structure of her aunt's household and the lingering shadow of her infamous childhood custody battle. At just 17, she made a bold and impulsive decision. She dropped out of high school and moved to Hollywood, drawn by the promise of glamour, independence, and reinvention. For a young woman who had spent her formative years under public scrutiny, California offered the illusion of freedom, a chance to define herself on her own terms. It was there that she met Pasquale DiCicco, known as Pat, a talent agent with connections in the film industry. Charismatic and worldly, DiCicco was significantly older and moved comfortably among celebrities and studio executives. To the sheltered and emotionally vulnerable Gloria, he appeared sophisticated and protective, qualities she may have longed for after a childhood marked by instability and fractured parental bonds. The couple married in December 1941, shortly after Gloria turned 17. Almost immediately, however, the marriage deteriorated into something dark and destructive. In later interviews, Vanderbilt described DiCicco as physically and emotionally abusive. She claimed he beat her, insulted her, and isolated her from friends and family. The relationship, she would later say, left her feeling trapped and frightened, a stark contrast to the fairy tale image often associated with Hollywood unions. One particularly harrowing incident she recounted involved DiCicco allegedly striking her in public, an episode that underscored both the volatility of his temper and the depth of her vulnerability. At a time when domestic abuse was rarely discussed openly and even more rarely prosecuted, Gloria had little support or societal validation. The stigma surrounding divorce, especially for a young heiress already known to the press, added another layer of pressure. By 1945, after 4 turbulent years, she finally secured a divorce. Though legally free, the emotional scars remained. The marriage had deepened her sense of isolation and reinforced a painful pattern in her life, seeking love and protection in men who ultimately brought harm. The fallout extended beyond the end of the relationship. Her aunt, Gertrude Vanderbilt Whitney, who had once fought fiercely for her custody, reportedly disapproved of the marriage and its consequences. Gloria's decision to marry so young, and the scandal that followed, contributed to her being removed from significant portions of the Vanderbilt family inheritance. Once again, her personal choices became intertwined with financial repercussions and familial judgment. This early marriage marked a pivotal chapter in Vanderbilt's life. It shattered youthful illusions about romance and independence, replacing them with hard-earned lessons about trust, power, and survival. Though still barely out of adolescence, she had already endured public scandal, private violence, and the erosion of family ties, experiences that would shape her complex, resilient identity in the years to come. Only months after finalizing her divorce from Pasquale de Chico, Gloria Vanderbilt entered another dramatic chapter of her life. In April 1945, at just 21 years old, she married the world-famous conductor Leopold Stokowski. The match immediately drew public fascination and skepticism. Stokowski was 42 years her senior, already a towering figure in classical music, celebrated for his leadership of the Philadelphia Orchestra and for popularizing orchestral music through projects like Disney's Fantasia. To some observers, the marriage seemed like an unlikely union between youthful glamour and seasoned genius. Yet for Gloria, still searching for stability after years of emotional upheaval, Stokowski may have represented refinement, intellect, and a kind of paternal reassurance. He, in turn, appeared captivated by her beauty and artistic sensitivity. Their marriage produced two sons, Leopold Stanislaus Stokowski in 1950 and Christopher Stokowski in 1952. For a time, motherhood offered Gloria a sense of grounding she had rarely experienced in her own childhood. She immersed herself in domestic life while continuing to explore her growing interest in art and design. Outwardly, the couple projected sophistication and culture, moving between New York and Europe, surrounded by musicians, writers, and social elites. Beneath the cultivated image, however, tensions simmered. The wide age gap and differences in temperament gradually strained the relationship. By the early 1950s, the marriage was unraveling. In 1955, Stokowski filed for divorce and launched a painful custody dispute over their sons. Echoing the traumatic courtroom drama of Gloria's own childhood, he accused her of neglect, claiming she devoted too much time to social engagements and insufficient attention to the children. Reports suggested he criticized her lifestyle and questioned her maturity, while resentment over their age difference surfaced in bitter exchanges. For Gloria, the accusations cut deeply. Having once been the child at the center of a sensational custody battle, she now found herself fighting to keep her own children. The echoes of her past were unmistakable. Once again, intimate details of her life were dissected in legal filings and whispered about in society circles. Despite the acrimony, Gloria ultimately prevailed, securing full-time custody of her sons. The court's decision affirmed her capability as a mother, but victory came at an emotional cost. The prolonged conflict revived old wounds, feelings of being judged, scrutinized, and publicly diminished. It also intensified her lifelong struggle with trust and abandonment. By the end of the marriage in 1955, Gloria Vanderbilt had endured yet another union that began with hope and ended in litigation. Though she emerged legally triumphant, the strain reinforced a pattern of love entangled with conflict. Still, through the turmoil, she retained custody of her children and continued shaping her own identity, not merely as an heiress or headline figure, but as a woman determined to define her life beyond scandal and sorrow. After the collapse of her marriage to Leopold Stokowski, Gloria Vanderbilt once again found herself standing at a crossroads. The custody battle had reopened childhood wounds, yet she remained determined to reshape her life. In 1956, she married acclaimed film and television director Sidney Lumet, a rising creative force who would later become known for classics like 12 Angry Men and Network. Lumet was closer to Gloria in age than her previous husband, and their relationship seemed grounded in shared artistic ambition. Both were deeply interested in culture, theater, and visual expression. For Gloria, who was increasingly exploring painting, writing, and design, the marriage offered intellectual companionship rather than the paternal dynamic that had defined her union with Stokowski. During these years, she began stepping more confidently into her own creative identity. No longer simply the Vanderbilt heiress, she worked seriously as an artist, exhibiting her paintings and cultivating friendships within New York's cultural circles. The couple lived primarily in Manhattan, surrounded by actors, playwrights, and filmmakers. Outwardly, the marriage appeared sophisticated and modern, a partnership built on talent rather than title. Yet even this union eventually unraveled. By the early 1960s, strains in temperament and lifestyle surfaced. Lumet's intense dedication to filmmaking often consumed him, while Gloria wrestled with her own insecurities and lingering emotional scars from earlier upheavals. After roughly 7 years, they divorced in 1963. The separation, though not as publicly explosive as her previous splits, marked another chapter in her pattern of searching for lasting love and coming up short. For Princess Marina, welcoming a newborn during war carried its own quiet anxieties. Britain was still enduring air raids, shortages, and the daily uncertainty of loss. Raising 3 young children while her husband's duties placed him frequently in harm's way demanded resilience and emotional strength. Still, the birth of Prince Michael symbolized endurance, a personal affirmation that life continued even as Europe was locked in devastation. The joy surrounding Prince Michael's arrival, however, was tempered by unspoken fear. George knew that his work increasingly required air travel under hazardous conditions, and he was painfully aware of how swiftly fortune could change. Unlike royal births in peacetime, this moment was not insulated by certainty or long-term security. Happiness existed side by side with apprehension, as if everyone sensed that time itself had become dangerously unpredictable. Tragically, that sense of foreboding proved justified. Just 7 weeks after Prince Michael's birth, Prince George would lose his life in an aircraft crash while on active service. The timing gave the event an almost unbearable poignancy. A child who would grow up never knowing his father had entered the world only weeks before George was gone. What should have been the beginning of a new chapter instead became intertwined with sudden and irreversible loss. On the morning of August 25, 1942, tragedy struck with brutal and irreversible force. Prince George, Duke of Kent, boarded a Royal Air Force short Sunderland flying boat, serial number W4026, at RAF Invergordon in northern Scotland. The flight was intended to be routine, a wartime journey to Iceland connected to his ongoing RAF duties. Despite the dangers inherent in wartime aviation, nothing about the mission suggested it would become one of the most devastating royal tragedies of the 20th century. Approximately 32 minutes after takeoff, disaster unfolded. While flying along the rugged coastline of Caithness, the aircraft veered off course and collided with Eagles Rock, a remote and unforgiving hillside near the village of Dunbeath. The impact was catastrophic. The Sunderland was torn apart on contact, erupting into flames and debris scattered across the steep terrain. Of the 15 men aboard, 14 were killed instantly. Prince George was among them. He was just 39 years old. The shock rippled quickly through Britain. In the midst of a war already defined by constant loss, the sudden death of a senior royal on active service struck a particularly deep chord. Prince George was not a ceremonial passenger sheltered from danger. He was a working RAF officer traveling under the same hazardous conditions as countless servicemen. His death underscored the reality that even royalty was not immune to the risks of war. Recovery efforts were slow and harrowing due to the isolated location and difficult terrain. The wreckage lay strewn across the hillside, a grim testament to the violence of the crash. Investigators later concluded that poor weather, navigational error, and low cloud likely contributed to the aircraft's fatal descent. Wartime conditions limited the depth of inquiry, and many questions would linger for decades, fueling speculation and rumor. Yet the core truth remained unshaken. This was a tragic accident born of war's relentless danger. The personal cost was staggering. Just 7 weeks earlier, Prince George had welcomed his third child, Prince Michael, into the world. He left behind his wife, Princess Marina, suddenly widowed at 35, and 3 young children who would grow up with little more than photographs and memories shaped by others' recollections. The cruel timing amplified the sorrow, turning what should have been a season of family joy into one of profound grief. For the monarchy, George's death was a sobering moment. He had represented a modern model of royal service, active, visible, and genuinely committed to national duty. His loss reinforced the idea that service carried real sacrifice, even at the highest levels. Public mourning was widespread, yet restrained, shaped by a nation already accustomed to heartbreak and determined to endure. Prince George was buried with full military honors, his death acknowledged not simply as a royal loss, but as the death of an officer in service to his country. In the broader narrative of World War II, his passing became a symbol of shared vulnerability, a reminder that the war spared no family, no matter how powerful. The crash at Dunbeath ended a life defined by duty, discipline, and quiet dedication. It froze Prince George in history as a man who lived and died by the values he was raised to uphold. In a single moment on a mist-covered Scottish hillside, personal promise, family happiness, and royal service were extinguished together, leaving behind a legacy forever intertwined with sacrifice. Witnesses later described the scene as heartbreakingly sudden. Despite her pleas, Carter climbed over the railing and fell. The shock was immediate and unbearable. For Gloria, time seemed to fracture into a before and after, the moment her son was alive and the moment he was gone. Carter's death was widely described as a suicide, though the possibility of medication-induced psychosis complicated the narrative. Regardless of terminology, the reality was inescapable. A vibrant young man with his future ahead of him had died violently, and his mother had witnessed it. The trauma of that final encounter, her voice calling out to him, remained etched into her memory for the rest of her life. In interviews years later, Gloria would call it the worst thing that could ever happen. No previous heartbreak. Not her father's early death, not her public custody battle, not failed marriages or widowhood, compared to losing a child. Grief became a constant companion. She struggled with questions that haunt many bereaved parents. Could she have done more? Was there a sign she missed? The sense of helplessness was overwhelming. Her younger son, Anderson Cooper, was 21 at the time and deeply affected by his brother's death. The family retreated into mourning, bound together by shared sorrow. In the years that followed, both mother and son spoke publicly about the enduring impact of that loss, helping to open broader conversations about mental health and complicated grief. Gloria eventually channeled her anguish into writing. In 1996, she published A Mother's Story, a raw and intimate account of Carter's life and death. The book was not an attempt to offer neat explanations, but rather an exploration of love, memory, and the incomprehensible nature of sudden tragedy. Through its pages, she sought both catharsis and connection, reaching out to other parents who had endured similar heartbreak. Carter's death permanently altered the trajectory of Gloria Vanderbilt's life. The vibrant heiress, artist, and designer who had weathered public scandal and private loss was confronted with a grief that defied resilience. Yet even in devastation, she continued to create and to speak, carrying her son's memory forward. His absence became the deepest scar of her life, a wound that never healed, only softened with time and reflection. Long before celebrity fashion lines became commonplace, Gloria Vanderbilt reinvented herself as a business pioneer. In the 1970s, at a time when her personal life had been marked by both triumph and tragedy, she entered the fashion world with an instinct for branding that proved remarkably ahead of its time. Rather than relying solely on her inherited name, she positioned herself as both designer and muse, a woman blending aristocratic pedigree with accessible glamour. Her breakthrough came with the launch of her signature designer jeans in the mid-1970s. At a time when denim was transitioning from workwear to high-fashion staple, Vanderbilt's fitted jeans, emblazoned with her swan logo and signature, became a cultural sensation. Sold in department stores rather than couture boutiques, they were marketed to everyday women who wanted style with status. The concept was revolutionary, a luxury name attached to mass-market apparel. By the late 1970s and early 1980s, the brand exploded in popularity. Reports estimated the company was generating tens of millions of dollars annually. Gloria Vanderbilt jeans were seen as both aspirational and attainable, bridging the gap between Fifth Avenue refinement and suburban wardrobes. She appeared in advertisements herself, projecting elegance, confidence, and a distinctly American femininity. Yet with rapid growth came complexity. The brand expanded aggressively into fragrances, accessories, bedding, and home goods through licensing agreements. While these deals initially boosted profits and broadened visibility, they also diluted creative control. As licensing multiplied, oversight became more difficult. Some expansions underperformed. Others failed to maintain the quality and exclusivity associated with her name. Behind the scenes, Vanderbilt faced the harsh realities of corporate life. Contracts, partners, and shifting retail trends proved far more complicated than artistic expression. Though her name was the brand's centerpiece, business structures often placed financial and operational control in the hands of executives and investors. As the marketplace evolved in the late 1980s and 1990s, competition intensified, and the brand's dominance began to wane. Eventually, she sold her remaining interests in the company. While the Vanderbilt name continued generating revenue for others, her direct financial benefit diminished. For someone born into one of America's most storied fortunes, yet who had seen much of it dissipate over generations, the irony was striking. Once again, wealth proved elusive and layered with complication. Despite setbacks, the significance of her achievement remained undeniable. She had helped pioneer the concept of the celebrity designer brand decades before it became industry standard. In doing so, she carved out financial independence distinct from her family inheritance. Still, commercial success never fully satisfied her artistic soul. Gloria often spoke of her deeper passion for painting, writing, and personal expression. The business world, with its contracts and compromises, felt distant from the intimate creativity she cherished. The fashion empire brought fame and fortune, but it also reminded her that financial triumph does not always equate to personal fulfillment. In her later years, Gloria Vanderbilt faced a different kind of heartbreak. Not the dramatic courtroom battles or public scandals of her youth, but a quieter, deeply personal betrayal. After decades of navigating fame, fortune, and loss, she placed her trust in professionals she believed were safeguarding her well-being. Instead, that trust would unravel in painful fashion. During the early 2000s, Vanderbilt discovered that a therapist and a lawyer she had relied upon had gained inappropriate access to her finances. These individuals allegedly exerted undue influence, gradually taking control of her bank accounts and steering her financial decisions in ways that did not serve her interests. For a woman who had spent her life surrounded by money, yet rarely in full control of it, the situation was both humiliating and destabilizing. The case eventually went to court, and Vanderbilt successfully sued for damages. The legal victory, however, offered only partial relief. Much of the lost money was never fully recovered. Legal fees mounted, and the emotional toll of realizing she had been manipulated cut deeply. In her 80s, she found herself once again entangled in litigation, forced to defend her autonomy rather than enjoy the peace that often accompanies old age. Compounding her difficulties were substantial tax obligations. The Internal Revenue Service insisted on full payment of outstanding taxes, regardless of the financial losses she had endured. Unlike earlier eras of Vanderbilt wealth, there was no vast family fortune to shield her. To meet her obligations, she was forced to sell properties, including valuable real estate and treasured possessions accumulated over decades. For someone once synonymous with Park Avenue elegance and high society, the downsizing was dramatic. There were periods when she lived in her son Anderson Cooper's spare bedroom, a striking contrast to the grand apartments and estates that had framed her earlier life. Yet rather than express bitterness, she often spoke with humility about the experience. The reversal of circumstances seemed to strip away any lingering illusion of inherited invincibility. The financial turmoil also exposed a deeper truth about her life. Despite being born into one of America's most famous dynasties, she had repeatedly built and lost wealth on her own terms. Her fashion empire had risen and faded. Her inheritance had long since thinned, and now even her later resources had been compromised. Yet amid these setbacks, Vanderbilt retained her creative spirit. She continued to paint, write, and reflect publicly on aging, resilience, and the fragile nature of security. The grandeur of her youth had long since softened into introspection. However, on June 17, 2019, Gloria Vanderbilt died at the age of 95 in her Manhattan home, closing the final chapter on a life that had spanned nearly a century of American cultural transformation. The cause was stomach cancer, a diagnosis that had been revealed only weeks earlier. Though the illness progressed quickly, she remained surrounded by family and close friends in her final days, a quiet, intimate ending far removed from the courtroom dramas and media frenzies that had defined her childhood. News of her passing was announced publicly by her son, Anderson Cooper, during an emotional segment on CNN. Speaking not only as a journalist but as a grieving son, Cooper reflected on the extraordinary complexity of his mother's life. He described her as a painter, writer, designer, and relentless creator, a woman who refused to be confined by a single identity. He also acknowledged the personal losses she had endured, the early death of her father, the infamous custody battle that turned her into the poor little rich girl, multiple marriages and divorces, widowhood, financial betrayal, and the devastating suicide of her son Carter. Vanderbilt's life had unfolded under constant public scrutiny. Born into the legendary Vanderbilt dynasty, she had become a symbol of both privilege and vulnerability. Over the decades, she transformed herself repeatedly, from heiress to actress, from socialite to pioneering fashion entrepreneur, from grieving mother to reflective memoirist. Her designer jeans empire in the 1970s and 1980s reshaped celebrity branding, while her paintings and writings revealed a deeply introspective soul. In her final years, she had embraced a quieter rhythm, often collaborating creatively with Anderson Cooper. Together, they recorded conversations and co-authored works exploring memory, love, and loss. These late-life projects allowed her to look back candidly at the triumphs and heartbreaks that had shaped her. There was no attempt to polish the past. Instead, she spoke openly about regret, resilience, and the endurance of maternal love. Her death prompted tributes not only from the fashion world, but from artists, journalists, and admirers who saw in her story a uniquely American narrative, one that intertwined wealth, reinvention, tragedy, and survival. She had lived through the Great Depression, World War II, the rise of television, the evolution of modern fashion, and the dawn of the digital age. Few public figures bridged so many eras while remaining personally relevant. What do you think about Gloria Vanderbilt? Leave us your comments in the section below. We hope you have found this helpful video. Don't forget to leave a like, share, and subscribe to the channel if you like it. Thank you for watching this, and see you in the next videos. Goodbye.